left off yesterday, one of the last things I added to my list was to check whether the camera is too close to the edge of the map. And this took a bit of thinking. I actually had to sit down for a little while, do some math, use a bunch of calculators. It's very similar to how I set up one of my other interfaces. My flight menu has these selection frames that highlight objects on the map, and I wanted to do the same thing with the orbit menu. When you're on the surface of a planet, there are these little highlighter frames. Just go ahead and quickly show you how they work. I still have to actually fix the highlighter frame, so I can show you guys exactly how I did this. Turbo mode through everything here. We've watched all this a million times. You'll watch this all a million more times if you're sticking with me. But right now I've got it set up so when you highlight a resource tile, you see a little frame pop up. And if you click on it, it stays there and highlights the tile. If you click anywhere else, tile goes away, or the highlighter frame goes away. And the problem I was having yesterday involves getting too close to the edge of the map and the field starts sort of crawling around because it doesn't have the right offset set up. I did fix the selector so that as long as you have something selected, it'll stay in the same place. And this takes a couple variables and a couple conditions. And I had to go through and set it up to at least work with the selector. It doesn't work with the highlighter quite yet. The highlighter still has an incorrect offset. But I'll show you how I set this up. When I get over here, that ends up staying in the same position. The highlighter does not. The highlighter still moves around, but the selection frame stays where it's supposed to. So I'll jump into my scripts. It's actually inside my rover in a little timer here. Same as the player ship, there's a series of conditions that constantly position those little selector fields. So since I haven't commented on anything, I haven't put comments in anything, I'll break it down here. Is the rover too close to the right edge of the map? Or from the right edge of the map? So what this one's doing is I want to take the rover's current X position and check to make sure that it's less than this value here. And this value here looks kind of long and confusing, but what I want to do is I want to get the size of the map, the width of the map, which is going to be, it's normally map main.size x, but that's not what we want. We want it to be the map that the rover's on, so I gotta change what's normally main here. I'm swapping that out for actor rover.map size x. So that's going to give me the total size of the map, the width of the map in pixels. And what I want it to do is subtract the width of the camera field, which is the display area that we're looking at, the little surface camera. That's about 640 pixels. And I could put 320 in here. I could just put that in there. I'd like to do this in case I ever decide to change the size of the camera or the size of that field. I won't have to come back in here and change the numbers. It'll just retrieve the current size. So I'm going to divide the width, the size X of my orbit cam, which is the little rectangular square in the center of the screen. Which, when you're looking here, it's basically this central field here. It's 640 by 320. That's super easy. It's a 2:1 or 2:1 ratio. Like most planet textures are 2:1. So I'm using the standard 2:1 size. So all it's doing is, that's the offset value. It's going to subtract it from the edge of the map. So if the rover is less than the size of the map minus half the size of the camera. So the size of the map would be about 1600. And the size of the camera, X width, is 640. So 640 divided by 2 is 320, so the edge of the map is 1600 minus 320. That'll basically give us 1280. We want to make sure that the rover's position is less than 1280. And if so, it's going to continue on. This is to make sure it's within the boundaries. This is going to make sure it's within the left boundary. Is the rover far enough from the left side of the map? And in this case, we don't need the map size. We need the left edge of the map, which is going to be 0 anyway, so you don't have to add anything. All we need is the number of the size of the surface camera's width divided by 2, so that's going to be 320. So as long as the actor or the rover is at least 320 away from the edge and at least 1280 away from the right edge, or 320 away from the right edge. So it's checking to see if there's a range here. Basically, if the rover's within the frame of the camera when it reaches the edge of the map. And then these are long. I don't know if these are easy to explain or not, but these little variable operations here, they get a little bit complicated, but what it's doing is, if the rover is within the boundary or far enough from the right edge, it makes sure it's also far enough from the left edge. And if so, it's just going to constantly position that field. Like I showed in the previous video, it takes the size of the camera and divides it by itself, or divides by 2, adds it to its size, and it checks a coordinate value that I've stored. Whenever you click on a tile, it stores its coordinates in a variable, and that's what the collection item text split over here is doing. It's actually splitting the coordinate variable into coordinates. So I can hold this open for a second so you can examine it or something. So it's taking the coordinates value that I've stored here, which is actually 2 sets of numbers divided by a semicolon, and collection splitting actually grabs each of those coordinates. So since the first coordinate, or entry number 1, is my x coordinate, I want to take the x coordinate of the tile, subtract the rover's position from it, or the rover's x position, and then add the size of the camera divided by 2 plus the size of the camera. It's a little bit complicated there, but the other condition is if it's greater than and too close to the size of, or too close to the right side of the map, we actually want to do something slightly different. It's pretty much the same for the first half, but then we want to subtract. The offset is going to actually be the size of the map, the x size of the map, minus the size of the camera divided by 2. So it's taking the size of the map and subtracting the 320, since my surface camera is 640. 640 divided by 2 is 320. This is a lot of math. It's a lot of confusing nonsense, but if you just want to copy this or try it out in your own project, feel free. Then it does the same when it's checking the left edge of the map. Instead of just floating the field around, it actually just subtracts the camera size divided by 2, since we don't need the map size. All it's doing is using the same, basically the same condition or value that I've got here as the offset. So it's subtracting an offset value at the very end where this minus sign is, or this minus sign. It's basically the final part here is capped in parentheses, and all that, I think all of these variables have this line here, and then there's a different offset for each one. So this one has its own offset. It's adding the size of the camera, and these are subtracting the size of the camera. And it's pretty much the same for the Y's. I'm going to go through and comment on all these later for my own sanity, but since it's storing them in these variables, position X and position Y, I can just use those values here, which allows all these conditions to choose which values are going to be passed to my position field event here, and that will move my selector field around. Now, the other thing that I also need to do is move the surface highlighter, which hilariously is going to also need the same exact kind of script here going on. So I can actually, I believe I can just copy and paste this, and this one's going to be using these values that are getting stored here. So I kind of want to disconnect this. I'm going to use a subscript, and if you've never used a subscript before, all these are, it's kind of like a little folder that you can put scripts inside, and it just saves room. You get this little node that holds all your script inside of it. So you don't have to, but I'm going to use a subscript here, and I might put these inside it as well, but for now I want this here. And there's a lot of things here that I'm going to have to swap out and change, but they're almost the same, I still want to use these same conditions to see if the rover's close enough to the edge of the map to trigger the alternate positioning values. Give me 1 sec here. Trying to find my beverage. Thanks. Forgot to fill up my tea earlier. Okay, well, starting from the top, the first condition just checks if it's too close to the edge of the map. I want to use my target X values here instead of the current cursor position, which I have stored, or the stored coordinates that I have in the other. These are picking up coordinates from the current stored tiles coordinates, which I have held in this variable surface selected. I don't want to do that. I want to use the target X, target Y values that I've got here. So for my X, I want to do Control A. I'm actually going to get rid of this extra space here first. Control A, Control C, cancel out, because I want this like a default little backup here. And over here, I want to make sure that I'm only going up to field orbit surface camera.x, which will be all the way in the middle here, because this is a shorter script than this one. It looks a little weird, so I want to get rid of that, get rid of that, get rid of that, and get rid of that, and put this in front of it. This is the script from the previous position field. I just want to replace that in each of these because all the offset values are already set, or the ends of the end of the line here after the minus sign is my offset value. And they're already set up in all of these conditions. So I'm go to replace this one with just that line, since this is the default. Looks like an extra space in here too. I'm a little picky about that sometimes. I miss little spaces. And this one, I gotta scroll all the way to the end here. Go back before that, and we'll paste that in there. And that should do for the X. Control all, copy. So all this is doing is that target X and target Y are storing the cursor's current position, and it's passing it in here. The selection frame actually uses the value that's stored from clicking, while this one is in real time. It's just taking the cursor's current position. I've stored it in a variable here to make everything shorter. So I want to copy all the Y value here. I'm just going to go down here and repeat exactly what I did, only this time I'm going to be cutting off from where it ends at surface camera Y. So I'll scooch all the way over here, grab it from there, and Control V. Highlight this whole one and Control V, and go back in here. I'll just drag and squish these out. And Control V, OK. Now instead of the selection frame, I want to position the surface highlight frame. And I'm using the same variables here because it'll just reset them each time it goes through the whole script, and it can use them twice, I believe. If not, I'll find out in a minute. Now if everything goes smoothly accordingly, it should now let my highlighter frames stay in place when I get too close to the edge, if I'm lucky enough.
Scanning. Entering planetary orbit.
Boop. And there's one issue still. So my highlighters are positioning correctly until I get too close, and I have to figure out where it's moving first. So it's currently, when I'm right here, I can actually go into my debugger. This objects list has all of your interfaces, all the fields, objects, everything in your game. And what I want to do here is check to see where it's going. Right now, its current X position is 335, 474. Tab over so it's right there. It's at about 366, 475. Now, when I get too close to it, it disappears. And it's now at 57, 467. So it's somewhere over here underneath the interface. And that's because I'm subtracting too much somewhere, and I've got to figure out what's going on. So 57 or 58, I'll just round it to 58. 364 or so. So going to my calculator, 364 minus 58, it's about 306. So the offset that it's doing is incorrect for some reason. I gotta figure out why. It's all correct for the selector, but not for the highlighter, which is weird. I'm not really sure. I have to think on this. Quickly just highlight X, highlight Y. I'm going to put in unique variables for these. Highlight X, just in case. I don't think this is what's doing it, but I'm going to just for some clarity here. I can always come back and remove that value, change it back, whatever. So I'm going to use a unique variable called highlight X and highlight Y to store those. And then I'm just going to try that one more time and see what happens, because something is up. Jump back in, turbo mode it, scan everything, dock again, land on the planet. So if I'm too close, my highlighter frame doesn't work at all. Now my highlighter just doesn't work, period. So let's see why it's doing that. Oh yeah, I forgot to actually update the position event. So come back in here, change this from position X to highlight X and highlight Y. Just in case the values are overwriting each other. Being that I'm absolutely terrible at math, sometimes I spend more time just struggling with
Entering planetary orbit.
switching operators and changing numbers and trying to figure out what's going on. So right now it's back to the way it was before, but if I get too close to it, it disappears. So it's not what I want it to do. The selection frame stays in the correct position, but not my highlighters. So once I'm highlighting it, I'm going to check its position again. It's going to be off by some decimals, but the surface highlight frame is currently at 328, just about 330 or so. And then once I scooch in just a little bit closer, where does it go? 338.26. So it's 26. It's a value of just about 320, which is the size of my camera field here. So I don't know why it's positioning it over there. So I thought I had all the values set up right. So if it is less than the distance to the left edge, let me see here. I'm going to cut out this offset value here really quick. These two are exactly the same though, which I don't think is correct.
Scanning. Entering planetary orbit.
Yep, that's not what I want it to do. Almost, but not quite, because I still want it to subtract that value. I want it to subtract... That's weird. That should work with that offset value, because it should be subtracting 320 and placing it here. Huh. So let me try just manually putting that in there. I'll change to my camera size later. But back into my subscript here, and minus 320. Very confused. If I had paid better attention in math class, good God. I imagine this is probably a simple problem for some people, but
Scanning. Entering planetary orbit.
now it doesn't work. But why? That's the correct value. Let's try a smaller number just to see if I can get it even on screen. So, instead of 320, try something like 128. Actually kind of stumped because it should be the same script as the selector frame, which works the way I want it to. This isn't functioning even close. That's what I believe is the right number. It's still positioning it off screen for some reason, so yeah. And then when you move around, if you're too close to the edge of the screen, it repositions it. I think I want to remove the rover position in there, if I'm not mistaken. Something. Yes. That's it. I was just blind. This script, or this event, actually includes the rover's position, but once you're too close to the edge of the screen, it should only be checking the camera position, because the rover will be moving away from the center of the screen, and I don't need its position anymore. So, rather than have this set to 128, I want it to be my orbit surface camera size divided by 2. So, that's actually stored right here. Come back in here, change that back to my offset value using the orbit camera. And then I just want to go through these and kill off this rover position here. And that includes the minus sign. I'll leave it in this one. Since this side, the left path is the condition for when the rover is within the bounds of the map and the camera's not up against the edge, it'll just move the highlighter and selector around with it. That should do it. I believe that fixed the problem. I don't want to take the rover's position into account if it's too close to the edge. We'll go back in here, turbo mode, out of range. Now I'm out of range again. Go back.
Entering planetary orbit.
Okay. Now my highlighter is there. It stays in place. When I get too close, selection frame stays in place. I just want to test it in a couple more spots. So my highlighter stays in place when I'm at the right edge of the map. When I'm at the top edge of the map, selector stays in place, highlighter stays in place. Now I've got one more edge to check. The very bottom. A little tricky, bumping into edges. Highlighter stays in place. Selector stays where it's supposed to. Those are field-based tile selectors, or highlighters, tile highlighting and selecting. So you can actually distinguish what tiles you want to be selectable. You can spawn or use fields on an interface to highlight them rather than having to spawn an actor on the map with your rover or with your anything really. If you're using a player character or just your average RPG hero, you can select tiles. Alright, so that's another little step down. One more step out of the way. I can go to my to-do list and say that's done. Huzzah! Now everything in here looks a little bit crazy, but what I can do is grab these, add another subscript, toss them in here, and give these names here: selection frame, highlight frame. I'm going to go ahead and grab these and stick them inside here. Delete that guy, paste these in, drag that there, let's scooch them in the middle here, and then reconnect those. Now, everything's a little bit cleaner looking. I've got the velocity settings up here for the drag, and then everything down here is related to the tile selection. So I can actually grab all of these if I wanted. Throw another subscript in here. And call that tile selector. Everything's neatly contained in this little subscript. It's got its own little subscripts inside. I could continue to put things in subscripts if I wanted. I could put these three into a subscript since they continue to the same node. That's a rule to follow. Any paths, really, if you're inside a subscript, all of these just continue outside through the bottom. So if you have a left and right path condition, it'll follow the path and then exit the subscript, rather than you having to worry about connecting anything to return nodes or whatever. It'll just, every path will lead out of the subscript. Excuse me. So very useful. I've got a tile selector completed, and the only other condition I want to add, not right now, but the highlighting and selecting of the resources. I don't want to be able to highlight resources that are surrounded on the edges by other tiles. We'll do that in another video. That's all I wanted to get into for this one. I'm going to take a bit of a break. Hopefully that was informative. Maybe if you've ever been trying to make a farming or crafting game or something and you wanted something that you can use to select tiles on the map, rather than using an actor, you can use interface fields, and it's a useful trick. I like to do that a lot. You can use actors. I have done that. I showed you guys how to make the actor-based tile frame in another video, but hopefully that was informative. When you get a chance, check out screamingbrainstudios.com for all kinds of free tile sets, textures, buttons, interface graphics, animations, game board stuff. There's a bunch of tutorials on old school graphics, making isometric graphics, first-person dungeon crawler graphics, seamless hexagons, and a whole big giant list of free graphics tools and game development stuff, things that you can use for free. All of this stuff is public domain except for the tools. Most of these tools you can get from different authors, but all of my graphics are public domain. Hopefully you guys are interested in sticking around for the rest of this series. I have no idea if I'm going to be able to finish this game or not, but I'm going to give it my best. So here's to the future, and here's to maybe one day seeing a release so you guys can play what I've been building this whole time. I'll see you guys next time.